Imagine a world where the very air you breathe could ignite a forest in seconds. A world where insects grew large enough to cast shadows like birds, and creatures evolved not just to survive, but to dominate a planet teetering on the edge of combustion, 50% oxygen. It happened. Not in a science fiction novel, not on an alien world, but right here on Earth. Over 300 million years ago, the balance of life was rewritten by a silent, invisible force. How could something as seemingly benign as oxygen become the architect of both creation and destruction? This is not just a story of ancient beasts and lush primeval jungles. This is the story of how a breath of air changed everything. The Carboniferous Period, stretching from roughly 359 to 299 million years ago, was unlike any epoch Earth had seen before. Swamps sprawled endlessly, smothered in thick, towering vegetation. Trees with bark harder than modern wood pierced the sky, dripping moisture into dense fungal air. In this verdant world, photosynthesis operated on overdrive. Plants, unchecked by decay, oxygenated the atmosphere at an unprecedented rate. This wasn't just a rise, it was a surge. Oxygen levels climbed to nearly double what we know today. Fires sparked with terrifying ease, sometimes igniting whole forests. But fire was only a fraction of the story. Deep within these oxygen-heavy jungles, something else was stirring. Life was evolving in strange, impossible directions. Creatures began to stretch against the limits of their bodies, driven by the very thing that gives life and waits patiently to take it. Among the strangest wonders to emerge from this high-oxygen crucible was the griffin fly, Meganeura. With wingspans rivaling modern hawks, it was a dragonfly in form, but not in magnitude. The dense, oxygen-rich air acted like an invisible scaffold, allowing arthropods to grow beyond what physics permits today. Lungs were no longer shackles, bodies expanded, limbs lengthened, and exoskeletons thickened into armor. But size came at a price. In this era, survival was not about stealth or speed, but scale. The ecosystem recalibrated. Predators no longer stalked silently between trees. They loomed, hulking shadows that moved in the mist like living machines. And in their path lay a simple truth: the more oxygen you breathe, the faster fire in the blood can burn. Every heartbeat thudded louder. Every chase risked internal combustion. In a world oversaturated with the very essence of life, death could come in a breath too deep or a sunbeam too strong. In this volatile atmosphere, ecosystems became crucibles of experimentation. Amphibians crept from water to land, finding it easier to breathe in the oxygen-rich air, their lungs gulping the sky like bellows feeding a flame. Limbs grew stout, rib cages expanded, and new forms blinked into existence. Creatures like Crassigyrinus, with serpent-like bodies and frog-like skulls, prowled the swampy margins, half fish, half lizard, perfectly adapted to this in-between world. Their domain was a realm where life pulsed not in decades, but in heartbeats. Evolution sped up, intensifying like a fever dream. The air itself became a biological accelerant, forcing species into faster cycles of growth, mutation, and extinction. It was as if the planet held its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from the crucible next. And while some life flourished, others, overwhelmed by the oxygen-driven inferno of metabolic demands, flamed out just as quickly as they arrived. This was not simply evolution. This was a biochemical arms race dictated by the whims of an environment humming at a frequency too high for the weak to endure. In the shadows beneath the ancient canopy, another transformation was taking root. Ferns the size of houses sprawled across the forest floor, their fronds forming living labyrinths. Giant club mosses, once humble ground-hugging plants, had become towering spires of photosynthetic power, stretching over 100 feet tall. These were not passive bystanders to the oxygen surge. They were the engines. Without fungi capable of breaking down the lignin in their woody tissues, these trees didn't decay in death. They built upon themselves, layer after layer, locking away carbon and releasing oxygen until the very atmosphere became saturated. It wasn't just a greenhouse world, it was a pressurized tank waiting for a spark. And with each year, the line between life and catastrophe blurred further. Every fallen tree was potential fuel. Every lightning strike a loaded dice roll. The planet was becoming sharper, more reactive, more alive. Nature no longer whispered, it hissed. Far beneath this surging, shifting canopy, in the silent depths of coal-forming swamps, something more ancient than bone was being forged. The dead did not rot as they would today. Instead, they pressed into the soil, layer upon layer, embalmed in time by the very conditions that had fed them in life. What oxygen gave, it also took away. Microbes that would normally feast on decaying matter struggled in the oxygen-heavy world. Decomposition was stunted. Trees lay where they fell, preserved like relics, their mass compressed by centuries of mud and sediment into black veins of energy. Future humans would mine this carbon-rich fossil memory and call it coal, never grasping the silent pact made in the Carboniferous jungles. Oxygen surged because death paused. Every flame that would one day light a city or power an empire began here, in ancient rot that never came. In this era, the past did not vanish. It piled up beneath the feet of giants, pressing ghost breaths into stone, holding the secrets of a world both ablaze and still. Above this churning planet of overgrowth and stillness, evolution's grand gamble extended skyward. Vast, humid canopies blocked sunlight from much of the forest floor, yet high above, another world unfolded in golden light. Here, in the treetop archipelagos of ancient lycopsids and seed ferns, the air shimmered with heat and abundance. Insects ruled these heights, no longer confined to the margins of ecosystems. With oxygen fueling their spiraling liftoffs and extended flight, creatures like the giant mayfly boasted aerial lifespans never before known. Wings buzzed with the rhythm of abundance, echoing across leaf-choked skies like ancestral hymns. But with altitude came risk. Temperature fluctuations were extreme, and wounds healed slower in the absence of decline. The air, rich but thin above the trees, pressed like invisible muscle against fragile wings. Life flourished in the weightless dance, but always just one tilt from the edge. From canopy to root, existence teetered like a flame in wind, brilliant and fragile, fed by an invisible tide that offered both height and fall. Yet survival in a world so rich with oxygen came with a paradox. The more abundant the fuel of life became, the easier it was to burn everything down. Fire did not lurk in corners, it prowled like a predator. Even a sunbeam through the mist, caught by a droplet and focused on a patch of dry underbrush, could spark a wildfire that consumed miles in hours. Creatures evolved not only in the arms race of tooth and claw, but in a ceaseless negotiation with heat. Scales thickened. Behaviors shifted. Nightlife flourished under soot-darkened moons, when the fires slept and the dew cooled the earth. Some species may have even adapted to predict lightning, scenting ozone in the air like wolves smell blood. And others, unable to outrun the blaze, learned to dig, to burrow deep into the earth that no longer decayed, hiding from a sky set ablaze by its own breath. Life did not drift through this age. It braced itself. Through smoke and silence, the line between thriving and perishing could be as thin as the film of moisture on a single fern leaf, glistening in the dawn just before a strike. But even in this furnace of fertility and flame, the roots of collapse were already growing. The abundance of oxygen, the very fuel of this age's grandeur, was inherently unstable. Eventually, the Earth's mechanisms would catch up. The explosion of carbon-sequestering plant matter, could not go on forever. As more and more organic material became trapped underground, carbon dioxide levels plunged, temperatures began to fall. Ice crept toward the equator. Swamps receded. Vegetation thinned. The suffocating lushness that had once stoked firestorms began to wither. And with the cold came the slow breathing of Earth reset. Oxygen levels dropped. The great beasts of scale lost their edge. Insects shrank. Amphibians dwindled. And the shadows of titanic ferns gave way to a more measured world. The Carboniferous was not merely a chapter in Earth's past. It was a rise and fall written in gas and flame. A reminder that in nature, balance is temporary, and even air can betray the very life it breeds. But long before this icy reckoning, as the Carboniferous apex blazed on, the sheer bounty of oxygen gave rise to behaviors and physiologies so alien they might belong to another world. The lines between predator and prey blurred in ways the modern mind struggles to imagine. Amphibians developed reinforced spines and skulls, not unlike scaled battering rams, while some insects mimicked the patterns of falling leaves to ambush from above. Muscles twitched faster, reflexes honed to hair trigger sensitivity, as even hesitation could mean combustion or consumption. It was not just the body adapting, but the very rhythm of existence reshaped. Reproduction accelerated. Lifespans shortened, then lengthened, unpredictably. Some species burned bright, lived fast, and vanished like sparks on wind. Others evolved eerie resilience, learning to pause metabolic activity entirely during fire seasons, a kind of biological hibernation against flame. The world was not alive in the way it is now. It was hyper-alive, vibrating with possibilities and claws and breath and smoke. A theater of natural extremes where only those who could endure both abundance and apocalypse found footing among the embers and the sky. Beneath the primeval thunderclouds, as storms rolled endlessly over this choked, electric biosphere, chemical forces stirred that would one day shape the blueprint of vertebrate life. The air crackled with more than just fire potential. It carried nitrates, lightning-born building blocks raining down alongside ash and spore. In this crucible of transformation, genetic oddities emerged and were tested in a gauntlet of extremes. Some lineages stumbled upon recipes for lungs more efficient, bones more reinforced, neural pathways that could process threat and opportunity in split seconds. It was as though nature, handed a surplus of power, began to draft rough sketches for lineages that would one day walk upright, wield tools, and wonder about their place in the cosmos. Nestled within the spores of ferns, the chitin of beasts, and the marrow of scaled proto-tetrapods, lay the seeds of every triumph and tragedy yet to come. For in this world of exhaled danger and breathless beauty, one truth echoed louder than firestorms. Evolution never forgets the landscapes where it was baptized in flame. And while the Carboniferous raged on like a dream set alight, the blueprints sculpted in its depths carried forward, lingering quietly in the genetic code of all that followed. The great oxygen surge faded, but its echoes persisted in the sensitivity of lungs, the branching of capillaries, the very logic of flame-retardant skin. When the great reptiles rose to rule, they did so in the shadow of those ancient breathers. When mammals emerged, blinking into a colder, thinner air, they inherited lungs once forged in abundance. Even now, in every breath taken by birds traversing the thin alpine air, or humans climbing mountains or fighting fires, there is the faint, invisible memory of a time when the air itself could kill or create. The Carboniferous didn't just change life, it wrote warnings into our bones. That surplus and scarcity live side by side. That power begets peril. And that sometimes, to understand how life climbs, we must descend into the breaths that nearly burned it all away. But history does not pause. As the Carboniferous world cooled and combusted under its own ambition, the stage was being reset for a new order. Tectonic plates shifted, mountain ranges heaved skyward, and immense glaciers scraped the earth clean. The fire-fed giants faded, and with them, the breath-thick haze of ancient air. Yet from the ashes of this oxygen empire, descendants emerged leaner, swifter, more adaptable. The reign of dragons, insect and amphibian alike, had ended, but the blueprint it carved into nature's code endured. Even in today's oxygen-thin world, echoes of that high-breath era pulse in the wings of a dragonfly, in the carbon-stained layers scientists now bore through, and in the paradox that what once gave life in excess nearly consumed it. Those forests now sleep beneath our feet, crushed into coal, exhaling secrets in smoke, and in that smoke hangs a question, suspended across time like dew on fern tips. Was it paradise lost, or just nature catching its breath? The ancient forests fell silent, but their breath never did. As Earth's oxygen returned to balance, it was not erasure but memory that lingered. Each coal seam is a monument to a time when air was an agent of both revolution and ruin. Today, in the hush of modern power stations, in the hush between lightning strikes, in the hush before a newborn's first breath, the Carboniferous whispers. It reminds us that life is not a straight line, but an echo chamber of excess and restraint, of bursts and balances. That survival is often less about what the world gives, and more about how life reshapes itself to carry the weight of that gift. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the amber veins of Earth, those breathless moments still burn, waiting to rise again not as fire, but as memory etched in every living lung, that once life soared, not because it was ready, but because the air insisted it rise. Through fossil records and subtle markers in Earth's oldest stones, we piece together a time when oxygen wielded a kind of tyranny wrapped in promise. But this history is not one resigned to the distant past. As our own planet warms, as carbon floods back into the atmosphere, and wildfires once more stalk the forests, the tale of the Carboniferous breathes again. The pendulum swings. Torrent and drought, abundance and famine, oxygen and flame. What happened then when air tipped the scales is not just a prehistoric curiosity. It is a prophecy dressed in soot. And in every flame we spark, in every lungful we draw, we may be closer than we think to reliving the burden of that breath. Not in the exact same form, perhaps, but in the pattern, the rhythm, the truth that when life dances too close to the edge of its own power, nature listens and balances the tune. So the story of 50% oxygen is not just what it did to life on Earth, it's what it warns. And that warning, older than bone, older than fire, may be the most enduring legacy the Carboniferous ever gave us. Even now, as we send probes to faraway worlds and dream of terraforming alien deserts, the legacy of Earth's oxygen past haunts our ambitions. When we imagine creating new atmospheres, we must reckon with what happened when our own sky brimmed with too much promise. High oxygen is not just a catalyst for vitality. It is a measure of balance stretched thin. The Carboniferous offers a mirror, fogged by time but still reflective. It urges caution in abundance, humility in power, because nature remembers. It evolves, it adapts, but it also recalls the thermodynamic tightropes it once walked. The age of 50% oxygen gave us the blueprint for both combustion and complexity. And in that brief, volatile crescendo of time, it whispered the most human of truths, that survival is not about aspiring higher, but knowing when to breathe slower, when to endure. The air is quiet now, but the lesson is loud. So as the Carboniferous curtain falls, veiled in steam and time, we are left with more than fossils and coal seams. We are left with a message scorched into the evolutionary arc of every living thing. When air once burned like oil in a forgotten lamp, nature lit the wick and watched the flames reshape the world. those flickers are with us still. In every wildfire kindled by drought, in every oxygen mask drawn tight in overstressed cities, in every whisper of ash that floats across a summer skyline, the past breathes beside us, not behind us. Maybe, just maybe, the Earth has already shown us both the apex and the warning, that in the tapestry of time, it is not fire that we should fear most, but the hunger for more than balance can bear. The breath that changed everything is gone, but the story it left behind is still unwinding, thread by blistered thread, in the air we breathe tonight. So the tale vanishes not into oblivion, but into our bloodstreams, into the pale rings of tree trunks and the coal smoke that brims over ancient cities at dusk. The Carboniferous is gone, yes, buried beneath epochs and tectonics, but its breath lingers. It hums in the background of every ecological decision, every engineered forest, every spark feared or desired. We do not live in its shadow, we live because of its gift and its warning. In a world yearning for control over its climate and resources, perhaps the most haunting truth is that Earth already authored this story once. And survival came not to the biggest or the brightest, but to those who listened closely to the rhythm of the world, gasping for balance. Our chapter is still being written, but in the deepest silence, between the inhale of dawn and the exhale of dusk, maybe we can still hear it. That breath, that memory, that echo of fire and bloom that reminds us what it once meant to live inside a world half made of oxygen and wholly dependent on restraint. And so, the story fades not with a bang, but with the slow quiet of respiration. What the Carboniferous gave through towering trees, armored insects, and an atmosphere crackling with explosive possibility, was not merely evidence of a past extreme, but a fable coded into every gust of wind we now ignore. The air shaped us. It throttled and tempered life, then watched it rise. We breathe not just for survival, but in honor of the billion-year balance etched into Earth's memory. And perhaps one day, when we stare up at a terraformed sky, or down through the eroded shells of our ambition, we will recall that the most profound revolutions come not from invention or conquest, but from the simple, titanic presence of something invisible. Oxygen was never just a gas. It was the cradle and the crucible. It is the hush before change, and the roar after imbalance. The Carboniferous lives on not only in stone, but in the quiet miracle of breath, and the fragile hope that we might learn, before we burn, to listen to the air again. If there is a final lesson etched into the cold, dark script of the Carboniferous, it is this: resilience is not resistance, it is reverence. Reverence for balance, for the quiet cycles that sustain life, for the breath that fuels, but can just as easily consume. The organisms that outlasted the 50% oxygen epoch were not the most fearsome nor the most flamboyant. They were the ones who adapted without arrogance, who yielded to change without vanishing. This ancient chapter of Earth's saga does not close with extinction alone, but with transmission of genes, of memories, of atmospheric truths passed silently from age to age. And though the air thins and thickens anew under our stewardship, the wisdom of that breath, a breath that once cloaked the world in firelight and flourish, endures. In the hush between geologic epochs, between pulses of carbon and flame, the planet waits. It listens to our engines and our ambitions, weighs our ability to remember. And somewhere, deep in that waiting, the old forests murmur not in protest or pride, but in patience. Because they've seen the pendulum swing, they know what happens when we stop listening to the air. So perhaps, in this tale of fire-fed forests, thunder-born life, and an atmosphere bloated with potential, the final flicker of understanding is not found in what rose, burned, or fell, but in what endured. The Carboniferous did not vanish. It transmuted into coal seams buried beneath cities, into the genome of every oxygen-breathing creature, into the silent awe that greets a forest shrouded in mist. Its gift was not dominance, but reflection, not power, but pattern. And as we tilt the scale of our own era, with fires of industry and ambition, a whisper curls through the still air, a reminder as old as the roots beneath our feet. Respect what breathes, remember what balance costs, and never forget that even the gentlest breeze once held the power to light the world or bring it to its knees. As twilight blossoms into night, and the veil of time drapes itself over the forests that once burned with abundance, we're left with the breath between epochs, a sacred pause, a held exhale. Somewhere, beneath layers of stone and silence, the Carboniferous world still hums, buried but not forgotten, its oxygen ghosts stitched into the lungs of every living thing. We carry it within us, that delicate paradox of vitality and volatility, written not in books but in bone and breath. It is a story too vast for every word, too intimate for language alone. But as this narrative draws to a close, one truth remains luminously clear. Life endures not by overpowering nature, but by understanding its tempo, its thresholds, its hushes. And whether we remember it as a time when Earth soared on air too rich, or as a warning wrapped in wonder, perhaps the final image is that of a fern leaf, unfurling in firelight, fragile, fierce, and listening, always listening. Up ahead, history wanders into shadowed marshes and forgotten cairns of coal, but here, as the murmur of the Carboniferous dims, something lingers, an after-image of grandeur. The air may no longer crackle with the volatile richness of 50% oxygen, but its impact reverberates in every system that breathes, from reptilian lungs to silicon-choked factories. Lessons lost in time wait beneath every wildfire and fossil fragment, urging us to remember not just the drama of Earth's flamboyant past, but the architecture of restraint it demanded. The Earth is a patient scribe, etching patterns into stone and atmosphere alike. And as our modern epoch bends itself toward extremes once more, the tale of ancient air returns, not as a legend, but a ledger. Life, ever fragile, ever persistent, whispers its truth in the rustle of leaves and the quiet between storms. Balance is not inherited. It must be re-earned, with each breath we dare to call our own. And so, the Carboniferous recedes into deep time, not as myth, but as a mythmaker, a period so saturated with contradiction that it birthed both terror and transcendence in equal measure. A time when fire walked beside rain, when silence followed the crack of trees toppling under the weight of their own oxygen-fed grandeur. The forests that once stood like green cathedrals now lie compressed beneath our cities, their whispers curling up chimneys and coiling in the twilight of our industrial age. As the last embers of this tale die down, what lingers is not the spectacle of scale, but the deft symmetry of natural law. The breath that once sculpted giants reminds us, in this softer, thinner air, that history's loudest truths often arrive in silence, in the stillness after the storm, in the lessons smoldering in the ashes. The Carboniferous is over, but its breath and its warnings are still being drawn. Let us listen, before the air grows heavy again. At the edge of comprehension and the furnace of memory, the Carboniferous remains a mirror held to the modern world's face. It does not preach, it reflects, with the clarity of unfiltered breath and the patience of a planet that has turned through cataclysm and calm alike. In the flutter of dragonfly wings, in the anxious scan of a dry forest skyline, in the oxygen tanks strapped to climbers, and the satellites measuring air composition from above, the imprint endures. 50% oxygen once built a kingdom of flame and form, and though we now breathe thinner air, our choices burn hotter than ever. So when the wind rises at dusk and carries the scent of rain or ash, remember, the past has lungs, and it is still breathing softly through us, urging one last echo. Balance is not a fossil. It is a promise we remake, or fail to, with every breath still left in Earth's gentle, waiting air. So this is where we leave the Carboniferous, not buried and forgotten, but living quietly in the marrow of the present. The fire-fed ferns, the sky-bound insects, the great oxygen bloom that changed the choreography of life. All of it echoes in our every inhale. We cannot unbreathe this past, nor outrun its lessons. As history folds back into the soil, into fossil seams and the quiet calculus of atoms, one truth remains unshakable, that life is drawn to the edge not out of recklessness, but because the edge is where transformation waits. And somewhere, in the balance between abundance and collapse, flame and leaf, breath and ash, we carry forward the unspeakable awe of a time when the air itself was enough to reshape evolution. The Carboniferous is gone, yes, but its voice travels still in the wind across dying forests, in the coal-black hush of winter nights, and in memories written not with ink, but with fire. The story closes then, not as a conclusion, but as a current. The Carboniferous breath does not simply echo, it circulates, breathed anew by machines and mammals alike, shaping destinies with every unseen molecule. It reminds us that the future of Earth may well hinge not on invention, but on attention to the invisible forces, to the balances held not by chains but by whispers. We inherit more than bones and stone. We inherit the charge of remembering what air can become. This tale of 50% oxygen was never about the past alone. It is our breath line to everything ahead, a spectral map drawn in firelight and fossil, urging us to tread lighter, think deeper, breathe wiser. For in every dusk that swells with heat, in every storm that smells of ozone and memory, there waits the old forest's final prayer, that the breath which once set the world alight may now teach us how to keep it whole. Let this be the final breath of our journey, a whisper woven through epochs, a reflection cast in the still waters of time. The Carboniferous Period, with all its fury and grace, gave Earth one of its most haunting symphonies, an atmosphere that could nurture or annihilate in equal measure. We followed its rhythm through firestorm and fern, through the lungs of giants and the root-bound silence of coal. And now, at the edge of this tale, we stand in the pause, the sacred moment between inhale and exhale. What we've seen is not just a chronicle of prehistoric marvels, but the anatomy of consequence, an elemental dance where balance shaped destiny, and too much of even life's essential breath threatened to undo the script. As history loops forward, shaped by carbon and memory, the message remains: respect the invisible, cherish the fragile, and never forget that once, long ago, the air dreamed too big and for a time turned the world into both miracle and warning. The Carboniferous legacy does not end with geology or cautionary tales. It lives in modern science, in every breath-calibrated chamber, in every wildfire model, and in the biologists decoding how oxygen still shapes metabolism, growth, and collapse. Just as early plants sculpted the sky, today our industries and choices inscribe their own story onto the wind. The fingerprints of that 50% oxygen epoch are detectable not only in fossil layers, but in our own lungs, calibrated for thinner air, yet still capable of remembering more. And so this tale drifts onward, not as myth, but as method, as a lost equilibrium still sought. The air has borne witness to epochs of flame and flood, and it will again. But perhaps this time, armed with the memory of what came before, humanity might inhale with reverence, not conquest, with awe, not arrogance, because the great breath is not over, it is just changing rhythm. And those who endure will be the ones who remember how to breathe in tune with the earth, not against it. In the end, the shaping breath of the Carboniferous is not confined to textbooks or museum dioramas. It is alive in every climate model, every engineered lung, every fire line traced across drying lands. It is a kind of living ancestry etched into the sky, a caution whispered in the rustle of leaves that once grew tall enough to touch flame. The drama of that era was not just its flame-kissed scale, but its revelation, that Earth can and will reinvent itself when pushed through abundance or collapse. We are the inheritors of that lesson, born from forests turned to coal, sculpted by atmospheres that once dared too much. And as we close this chapter with breath held, perhaps that is the greatest legacy of 50% oxygen, not the dragons it raised or the ghosts it left, but the truth that the gene for survival is memory. And somewhere, deep in the air we breathe tonight, the past waits not to be worshipped, but to be heeded. So we end where we began, in the breath, the silent architect of eras, the invisible thread that stitched together titans and tinder alike. 50% oxygen did not merely alter life on Earth, it rewrote the terms on which life could exist at all. What it birthed were not just creatures of scale or firestorms without mercy, but the blueprint for resilience masquerading as abundance. That chapter, scorched into the planet's deep memory, is not closed. It breathes forward, pulsing through every survival strategy, every warning flare, every recalibration of a system learning the cost of forgetfulness. And with that final exhale, as night swallows the oxygen-thick dreams of an age long gone, the lesson etches itself once more into the marrow of our modern story, that even the most invisible things can forge entire worlds, and undo them, one breath at a time. Let it be this memory, then, that drifts with the wind through fossil beds and wildfire embers, through the still breath of midnight forests and the exhale of steel-clad machines. Let it linger in the hush of museums and the thunder of collapsing glaciers. The Carboniferous was not just a time, but a testament, a breath that dared too much and revealed everything. It showed us that life, when given too much of its own spark, must relearn patience or be consumed by its own possibility. In this final quiet, we do not simply look back, we look inward, into the lungs that remember, into the choices that shape tomorrow, into the staggering fragility of balance. 50% oxygen carved its legacy into stone and cell alike, and if we're wise enough to listen to the breath it left behind, we may just remember how to shape a future that bursts into bloom, not into flame. So let the embers glow not as elegies, but as invitations. The Carboniferous story of air too rich, of life too bold, of forests too flammable, is not merely an ending buried in deep time. It is a spark in the present, flickering in our data, glowing in the red lines of climate graphs, and curling through every conversation about what it means to inhabit a living planet. In the quiet after this tale, we are left not only with wonder, but with responsibility to step softly across a world that once burned for dreaming too loudly. And perhaps, if we take this memory into our lungs like a prayer, we may yet learn that the future of life depends not on how high we reach, but on how carefully we breathe. That balance is not a line we hold, but a rhythm we learn, one drawn long ago, in the breath of a fern, the wingbeat of a dragonfly, and the hush of a world made entirely of yes, but waiting always for the question. And now, the tale exhales its last, not with finality, but with a fragile, flickering hope. In remembering what 50% oxygen once did to this earth, we do not just peer into history, we peer into the soul of resilience. Evolution is not just a series of reactions, but a memory written in air. The forests no longer burn with the same reckless abundance, and the skies have softened, but their message remains suspended in every molecule that passes from leaf to lung. We are the breath between epochs, the stewards of atmosphere and story alike. So when the wind stirs softly through the trees tonight, it carries more than air. It carries warning and wonder, tragedy and triumph. It carries the Carboniferous not gone, not dead, but whispered forward in the breath of every living thing that dares to rise and listen. It is with this listening that our part in Earth's long symphony must begin. Not as conductors above the score, but as caretakers shaped by its echo. From the first oxygen bloom that scorched landscapes into legend, to the whispering leaves swaying now under skies we strain with our progress, the breath that once lit the Carboniferous world still flows through our stories, our science, our survival. The lesson does not lie in fear of fire or reverence for giants long gone, but in the courage to remember that abundance without awareness kindles its own undoing. This is not merely history for sleep, it is dream and reckoning. A lullaby of ancient air, returning each dusk not just to teach, but to ask, will we be the next chorus to rise from breath, or the silence that follows it? Let this question settle with the night, gentle as dew, heavy as memory, and let those who breathe still learn to do so wisely. So, as the stars settle over the layered bones of time, laid bare beneath the frost-veined echoes of ancient ferns, we close the curtain on this Carboniferous epic, not with certainty, but with a reminder. This was not simply the tale of what 50% oxygen did to life. It was the revelation of what air can become when abundance outpaces order. What survival requires when the most essential element turns volatile. The story now sleeps, deep beneath the coal seams, and in the genome of every species that dared to breathe. Yet its breath remains restless, curled in cloud, in fire, in fear, in memory. And as we drift into sleep, lulled by the hush of fern leaves and forgotten winds, let the final image burn soft and steady. A green world brave enough to try excess, and wise enough to embrace transformation. The Carboniferous taught us that balance is more than survival, it is reverence in action. And in this quiet, shared breath between epochs, the earth waits not for echoes, but for listeners. Let that silence linger now, as the screen fades to black, and only the sound of the earth's breath remains a low, eternal hum threading through time. The Carboniferous does not ask for worship, nor fear, but for remembrance threaded with humility. Its gifts were wild, extravagant, and fragile. And in that fragility lies the truth we so often forget, that even abundance must answer to rhythm. We leave its shadow not with answers, but with a compass carved from carbon and caution. For as long as lungs draw in the air, as long as forests murmur and embers whisper, the story continues, not just told, but lived. The breath that changed the world is now ours to carry, carefully, steadily, into whatever comes next. So sleep now, beneath the canopy of time. Let fire rest, let fern dreams drift, and let the great breath above all cradle this night in balance once more. And as the stars fade, and the earth begins another slow turn toward morning, let this breath of history pass softly from story into stillness. The Carboniferous, with its fire-fed dreams and oxygen-laced truths, lies behind us now like a distant forest seen through smoke. Its lessons echo not just in ash and amber, but in every moment we dare to dwell in awe and restraint. For the tone of tomorrow will not be set by monuments of might, but by those who remember how quickly the gift of abundance can burn. So as the final echoes settle, may we hold close the message, fern and flame, once whispered across an ancient sky, that to breathe is to belong, and to balance, truly balance, is to endure. Sleep now, in the hush of that knowing. Let the world breathe quiet again. And in that quiet, the Carboniferous leaves us not with roaring flames or vanished titans, but with one final breath, one that curls through every dawn mist and dust-laden breeze, asking not what we can conquer, but what we can remember. It is the kind of memory that outlasts names and epochs, etched not in artifacts, but in atmospheric permission, in the invisible allowance that lets life stretch toward the sun or curl into the soil. 50% oxygen was no accident. It was a planetary crescendo, one written in chlorophyll, lightning, and time itself. And though our era hums with its own dissonance of carbon and heat, the rhythm remains. That ancient breath, once too lush to last and too powerful to ignore, still waits in the spaces between our own, reminding us gently yet firmly. The earth does not forget, and if we wish to stay in its story, neither can we. So let us end, where all stories of breath must within the stillness of dawn, where the echoes of fire and fern fall quiet, and the lungs of the earth begin once again their ancient cycle. The Carboniferous did not simply shape the past. It softened the future, made it malleable, gave it a vocabulary of caution and courage. We carry that lexicon within us in every instinct to preserve, to adapt, to pause before the match is struck. 50% oxygen was not merely an atmosphere. It was a mirror, a trial, a song sung too loudly across the bones of a planet learning its scale. And now, as we return to the hush of sleep, let us hold close the deeper meaning it offered, not just the awe of what once was, but the hope that wisdom can follow wonder. That breath alone is not promise, but potential, and that within each inhale lies the choice to protect or repeat, to listen or to ignite. Sleep well, then, in the shelter of memory. The earth remembers, so must we. And as the last breath of this tale dissolves into dusk, may its memory settle deep beyond thought, beyond sound, into the part of us that knows balance not as theory, but as necessity. The Carboniferous was not a cautionary tale in fable's clothing. It was real, tangible, a living crucible where air sculpted eons and flame etched wisdom into stone. Its silence was earned, not given, and it leaves behind no ruins, only reminders that the invisible can be the most powerful, that life is both fragile and audacious, and that tomorrow depends on what we choose to remember tonight. So rest now, in the hush carved by ancient oxygen. Let the air, centuries in the making, hold your dreams gently, and let the earth, that quiet keeper of breath and time, lull this story and us with the soft, waiting rhythm of survival. Here, as the final gust of prehistoric wind drifts into memory, the Carboniferous offers its benediction not as flame or fossil, but as breath paved into legacy. The earth, shaped by that one daring era of too much air, does not forget the tenor of excess, nor the silence it took to survive it. And so we leave this epoch not with a closing, but an invitation to listen not only for the roar of history, but for the hush beneath it, to hear evolution not in the din of invention, but in the pause it humbly allows. The age of 50% oxygen has exhaled its last. Yes, but its rhythm remains, a steady pulse in the marrow of trees, in the stillness before the storm, in the resolve of every quiet creature that chose patience over power. In a world racing to breathe faster, the Carboniferous waits, teaching still, whispering always, that sometimes the most courageous act for life is not to burn brighter, but to hold the breath and endure. And so we leave the Carboniferous behind, carried not by the roar of its fires, but by the quiet breath that still trails through time. Its story was never just one of excess or extinction, but of alchemy, how light and leaf, storm and soil conspired to create a world too vivid to last, yet too vital to vanish. Its legacy is not fixed in stone or soot, but in movement, in adaptation, in the deep-rooted resilience that saturates every breath we take. The era of 50% oxygen faded, but it did not disappear. It transformed us, shaped how we live, how we burn, how we breathe, and as we go forward into an unpredictable dawn, let the memory of that lush, dangerous air guide us not with fear, but with reverence. For in that long-ago time, when the sky itself held life and threat in equal measure, Earth showed us that balance is not achievement, but practice, a discipline as invisible as breath, and as essential. The Carboniferous has exhaled. It is our turn now to breathe once more, and choose what kind of world that breath will build. So let this final inhale rise slow and sacred a tribute, not just to an epoch long vanished, but to the invisible forces that made and unmade it. The Carboniferous did not vanish into silence. It passed its breath forward, folded into the DNA of every creature awake under these thinner skies. Its legacy waits in every choice we now face, whether to mirror its fire-fed boldness without its wisdom, or to match its abundance with humility. This was never just a history for sleep. It was a lullaby woven from wildfire and fernlight, a memory sung across ages in the rhythm of the earth's own lungs. And as our own age teeters, drenched in both power and peril, this ancient breath stirs once more in forests facing flame, in oceans gasping for balance, in children born into climates unsure. So close your eyes now beneath stars once dimmed by burning leaves. Let the carbon dreams settle soft into the soil. And remember, as the world once did with every exhale, that balance is not a finish line, but a vow, a sacred, trembling promise, carried always in the breath. So now, as the final threads of this tale unravel into the dark, we close not just a chapter of prehistoric wonder, but a hymn sung in carbon, rooted in flame, echoed through atmosphere. The Carboniferous does not fade quietly, nor end in separation. It fuses with us, inhabits us, reminds us that the world once walked a line so thin, so flammable, that every breath was a gamble, and every fern a question answered by fire. That epoch was not a spectacle, it was a crucible. It asked what life could be, when air gave more than it should, and what would thrive before it all turned to smoke. Now, as silence folds around this memory, and sleep drapes gently across listening minds, we honor not only the era that dared to breathe more, but the balance that dared to return. The air is quiet now. Let it stay that way, for as long as we remember. The Carboniferous may have drawn its final breath over 300 million years ago, but its resonance hums still, curling through genomes, drifting across firelines, echoing in the lungs of every living being, caught between peril and possibility. It was never simply an epoch. It was a crucible of caution cast in oxygen. As storytellers, scientists, survivors, we do not merely recall it, we speak through it. We inherit its rhythm, its terror, its grace, and so we end, held inside its last long exhale, with hearts and minds tuned to a lesson too vital to forget, that when life is given too much, it must answer not with conquest, but with care. Let this final breath settle gentle as pollen, firm as memory, inside the silent spaces where understanding grows. Sleep, then, beneath this ancient canopy, soothed not by certainty, but by reverence. For the earth remembers, and because it remembers, so must we all the way down to the breath. And so the final ember fades, tucked into the folds of sleep, where stories and science entwine in dreams shaped like ancient ferns and dragonfly wings. The Carboniferous is gone, yes, but not lost. It breathes still, soft and spectral, through the choices we make and the world we are becoming. For in the hush of history's deepest chapters lies not tragedy, but trust. Trust that nature remembers the balance, even when we forget. Trust that breath itself is legacy, not guarantee. And in this trust, cradled beneath starlit branches and carbon-thick skies, we find our quiet vow to be better stewards of the air, to walk softer paths through the forests still listening, and to let stories like this one, not of conquest, but of caution, guide us gently home. So sleep now in the stillness. Let the breath of a world once too bold remind the soul that harmony is never accidental. It is chosen, again and again, with every inhale and every exhale. So let this be our waking hush, a breath held on the cusp of forgetting and remembering. The Carboniferous gave its roar, its bloom, its ash, and in its stead, we are left not with judgment, but with guardianship, to tend to the air not merely as resource, but as inheritance, to see in every breeze not just weather, but history flowing forward. The story we told was wrapped in smoke and fern, but its truth remains stark and clean. Balance is a ritual, not a relic. Fire will come, and forests will falter, but memory, if honored, can forestall the fall. Let this be the legacy we carry, quiet and enduring, that even when the air gave too much, and the world teetered on the edge of its own breath, life found rhythm again. Let that rhythm be us now, awake, listening, breathing with care. And with that breath, we step lightly into silence, not the quiet of endings, but the quiet of responsibility. The Carboniferous roared and whispered, ignited and healed, gifting both legacy and warning in the air it once thickened beyond reason. Its memory lingers not only in ancient seams of coal, but in each policy penned, each forest preserved, each invention that heeds restraint over ambition. For in truth, 50% oxygen did not just reshape the world, it revealed the cost of ignoring its limits. So let us carry that wisdom as torch and compass alike, guiding a future where breath is not gambled but cherished. Let sleep now cradle this story, not as a lullaby of what was, but as a sacred vow of what must be. Breathe slowly, with awe, with care, for the earth is still listening. And so the breath of the Carboniferous finds its final resting place not in stone or fire, but in our awareness. As the veil of sleep draws near, and the echoes of ancient forests quiet to a gentle hum, what remains is not just memory, but mandate. A call not to rewrite nature's rhythm, but to rejoin it. To see our breath not as entitlement, but as inheritance drawn from eons of experimentation and equilibrium. Let this last whisper of oxygen-rich history cradle our thoughts tonight, soft and solemn, reminding us that the most powerful force on earth once came silently through the air, and that now, in this thinner, trembling atmosphere, our survival depends not on conquest or control, but on remembering how to breathe as the earth once did, deliberately, reverently, and just enough to keep the flame from consuming the forest once more. Let the screen go dark now, as if the world itself is reclaiming its breath, not with drama or despair, but with a solemn trust in trusting us with what came before, with what comes next. The Carboniferous story, this lush and volatile epoch sculpted in firelight and photosynthesis, exits not with explosion, but with invitation. To inhale thoughtfully, to see atmosphere as legacy, and to carry forward not the mistakes, but the memory. It does not end with us, but asks us to begin again with wiser lungs and gentler steps. As night settles over sleeping forests and memories wrapped in chlorophyll, let us lie still under ancient stars, not only to rest, but to remember. That air can make a world, and it can unmake it too. Balance, like breath, must be given, guarded, and above all, earned. So, close your eyes now, and let breath become memory, memory become humility, and humility become our promise. Sleep then. The earth is still breathing. Let's make sure it always can. And so, beneath the weight of millennia and the hush of living air, we return at last to the question that opened this journey. How could something as seemingly gentle as oxygen shape the course of life with such quiet volatility? The answer now lies nested in every breath drawn in contemplation, in every pause before ignition. It lies in the duality that defines our world, that creation and destruction often share the same wind. The Carboniferous was not merely a chapter closed, it was a breath still unfinished, folded into the syntax of survival and inscribed beneath our skin. In honoring it, we do not merely learn the past, we inherit the tempo of endurance, the hush of reverence, and the courage to trust the unseen balance that holds tomorrow. So sleep now, not in fear, but in rhythm. For the forest no longer burns with careless abundance, and fire no longer owns the sky, because we, too, breathe. And in that breath lives the ancient vow to remember and to endure. And so, the Carboniferous breath exhales its last note across the centuries, a soft reminder that even the quietest elements can shape the loudest fates. In this final pause, as the story folds gently into the cradle of memory, one truth rises, like mist from the forest floor, that survival is not born from dominion, but from deference to pattern, to pace, to breath itself. Let the tale rest now, not as a relic locked in fossil or flame, but as a mirror polished by time, urging each generation to see more clearly the atmosphere they inherit. The lesson was never simply about what oxygen once became, but about what life chose to do with it. To remember is to preserve. To breathe mindfully is to belong. And as we let this history dissolve into sleep, may we rise tomorrow with lungs full not only of air, but of understanding that balance is forged, not in silence alone, but in the sacred act of listening deeply and choosing stillness when the world tempts fire. And thus, as the sky brightens and time slips quietly forward, we leave behind the forested dreams of a world once fed by breath too rich to last. The Carboniferous speaks no more in roaring fires or swelling canopies, but in the cadence of reflection it stirred in us with every inhale drawn in gratitude, every scientific discovery layered over cold dark truths. Let this be the final ember we carry. That air is more than element, it is covenant, a bond between earth and life, shaped by caution as much as possibility. We have listened to the breath that once forged titans, and we emerge not just wiser, but bound to remember. So go now, gently, into the silence that follows the song, and hold every breath as a promise to balance, to awe, and to that green hush that whispered the world awake. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let reverence breathe in its place. Let this be the lull at the end of the storm, the long exhale after a tale too enormous for language and too intimate for forgetting. The Carboniferous was not a myth of fire or a parable of plants. It was a turning point drawn in breath itself. Today, we walk through a world quieter than that ancient age, yet no less fragile, no less bold. And in this moment, as history curls back into the soil and breath sinks to silence, we are reminded, legacy is not just passed through fossils or flame, but through the choices we make within the air we share. So let the final note of this symphony be not sorrow, but stewardship, not memory fading, but memory guiding. For though the Carboniferous is gone, its rhythm is still inside us, tapping gently against the cage of every rib, whispering to every soul tuned enough to hear it, breathe with care. Always, breathe with care. So this is how the forest sleeps its roots, entangled with fire's memory, its canopy echoing with a breath no longer loud, but never forgotten. The Carboniferous does not reach back to claim us. It waits, still anchored in our decisions, still twined through our atmospheres and algorithms, asking only that we heed what was once true at both the peak of abundance and the edge of ruin, that the forces which build can just as easily break, and that air, silent though it is, speaks in consequence. The last chapter is not carved in stone, but in the choices we carve with each future breath. Let them be slow. Let them be deliberate. Let them carry forward not the blaze of ambition unchecked, but the cool resolve of a planet once scorched into wisdom. The Carboniferous has breathed, it has warned, and now, in the quiet between tides and time, it simply asks, will we remember to breathe in balance, or forget, and flare again? Let that be our guiding breath, the final, patient inhale at the edge of understanding. The Carboniferous did not vanish in silence, it exhaled into legacy. In every laboratory where oxygen levels are studied, In every policy shaped to cool a warming world, its memory lingers. This was never just a story of ancient forests or oversized insects. It was a blueprint coded in balance, and a quiet warning etched into the marrow of every living thing. As we walk forward into an era groaning under its own atmosphere, we must ask not whether we remember the Carboniferous, but whether we've learned from it. For the world, once again, breathes on the precipice. So we close this tale not in finality, but in vigilance. The past has spoken, the earth has listened. Now, with every breath still left in us, it is our turn to answer, not with fire, but with care. Sleep now, not to forget, but to awaken differently. And so, beneath this final canopy of reflection and shadow, we let the story of 50% oxygen take its true form, not just a tale told before sleep, but a breath returned to the earth itself. From fire-fed skies to the buried hush of coal, from the rhythm of fern and rainfall to the warnings stitched in modern air, the Carboniferous offers not closure, but continuity. It calls forth the humility to breathe gently in a world still remembering. Let this be the ending only by name, not by meaning a soft surrender to the truth that balance is not a moment, but a movement stretching across eons. Sleep now, under the weight of awe and the lightness of air remembered. For the story breathes on in moss and fossil, in ember and idea, and as long as we listen with reverence, it will never truly end. So now let sleep carry us, folding the Carboniferous tale into the innermost chambers of our memory, where breath becomes awareness and history becomes vow. The epoch of soaring oxygen has spoken its truth not as myth, but as message. And in that plume of ancient air, we find the compass for our time. That the earth is not simply a stage, but a partner, tuned to its own rhythm, tested by every gust we take for granted. Let this final night breeze draw across our thoughts, like a reminder from long ago that life is not guaranteed by abundance, but stewarded by restraint. That nature, in its quiet cycles, shapes not only forests and fossils, but futures. And as dusk closes its eyes upon the ferns and firestorms of distant yesterdays, let us rise someday soon not in dominion, but in harmony, breathing in not just what is given, but what we choose to give back. With that, let the last whisper drift. The Carboniferous has exhaled. May we honor it with every breath still to come. And as the breath of this tale dissolves softly into memory, may we cradle it not as a relic of science nor a fable of the forest, but as a guide, a solemn lantern for the path ahead. 50% oxygen once rewrote the script of existence, reminded the planet what vitality could become, without boundaries, and mirrored back what it means to grow too fast, too wide, too hot. The Carboniferous exhale was not just a moment in deep time, it was a revelation enduring in slow revolutions. So now, as night settles over fossil beds and fire lines, let our dreams stir not with fear, but with reverence for the world that once breathed too much and lived to whisper the cost. Let balance not be our afterthought, but our beginning, for the air does not forget, and in every breath left to us, may we earn the right to be remembered not by how we built, but by how softly, how wisely we chose to breathe. Let this be the final breath drawn in the quiet before dawn, the moment where fire-streaked history folds into thought and oxygen's long echo yields to the hush of understanding. The Carboniferous speaks no longer in roaring canopies or winged giants, but in the stillness that follows those truths, settling like dust on the soul. In remembering what abundant air once built and broke, we are not merely students of geology, but keepers of equilibrium, heirs to a fragile atmospheric rhythm, scored in silence and sparked in awe. So as the world turns once more, softer now beneath its thinner sky, may we walk from this tale not just consoled, but called to be patient with the earth, attentive to its pulse, and reverent in our reach. The Carboniferous has exhaled. The breath is ours now. Let us carry it not as burden, but as vow to cherish, to heed, and above all, to breathe like we remember. And now, beneath the hush of finality and the weight of what we've traced across prehistoric skies and present tension, comes the stillest moment of all, the breath that does not rise in speech, but in stewardship. The Carboniferous has spoken, flame by fern, fire by fossil, and in its long exhale, we've glimpsed both the fragility of equilibrium and the power of remembrance. As we close this long dream painted in oxygen and ash, let it not fade entirely into night. Let it linger. In classrooms and policy rooms, in the work of hands restoring forests, in the breathless awe of children tracing the veins of a leaf. This was no bedtime story. It was a covenant, spoken in air, and now sealed in silence. So let us sleep tonight with hearts tuned to that balance, and rise, when we do, not just breathing but finally, reverently, listening. The Carboniferous has exhaled, and it's up to us now, guardians of breath, keepers of flame, to decide what the next breath will build. And so, history's exhale falls quiet, resting in the marrow of time and the breath of those willing to remember. The Carboniferous has left us no kings or monuments, only a world once ruled by air too rich to last, and the eternal truth that even life's most vital elements must be held in balance. As we step out of this tale and into dawn's muted light, let the lessons settle not as fear, but as guidance, that abundance requires humility, and that the rhythm of survival is written not in power, but in pause. The earth does not demand perfection, only patience, only care. And now, as this story closes beneath the hush of sleeping forests and the whisper of wind reborn from long ago leaves, may we carry forward the breath that changed everything, not just in lungs, but in choice. May we live in step with the air, and never again forget what excess once lit a flame. Sleep now, in balance. Dream as the ferns once did, quiet, bold, and rooted in the hope that we listen, before the air grows heavy once more. And thus we close the scroll of ancient air, rolled carefully through eons of firelight and fern mist, tucked not into vaults, but into breath itself. The Carboniferous has served as both origin and omen, revealing that even the most essential element can become catalysis for both splendor and collapse. What it gave us, resilience, coded in oxygen, memory etched in soot, is not a tale to forget with waking, but one to carry into every thinking dawn. So let the breath drawn now be quieter, more conscious, more connected to the pulse of the planet it sustains. For in every wildfire sparked, every tree planted, and every gasp for balance in an age of extremes, the echo endures. This was not the end of a world, it was the beginning of understanding. And if we are to merit our place in Earth's long breath, we must live mindfully, root deeply, and inhale not just air, but responsibility. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let its last breath ring forward, not only as warning, but as vow. Sleep now, beneath the rhythm of Earth's patience. Tomorrow is listening. So ends the breath that once lit a world ablaze, not with destruction alone, but with a force of possibility that wrapped life in fire and bloom all at once. The Carboniferous has walked us to the edge of knowledge and back, reminding us that air is never just background, it is battleground, blessing, and beacon. Its legacy folds now into our own, a thread running from the highest canopy to the deepest core of what it means to inhabit this living planet. And as we drift into sleep, carried by the rhythm of time and the hush of oxygen remembered, let one truth enfold us completely: that every breath is borrowed, every balance negotiated, and every future sculpted by what we choose to remember, not in fear, but in reverence. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let us, at last, inhale with gratitude and step gently into dawn's waiting quiet. And now, with the whisper of ancient leaves settling into silence, and the final ember dimming in Earth's unseen hearth, we draw closed this long breath of time. The Carboniferous gave us a world unlike any before or since, flushed with oxygen, volatile with beauty, and alive with the tangled dance of life, skimming the very edge of combustion. It showed us how nature, when allowed to bloom unchecked, can sculpt wonders and weave warnings in equal measure. We emerged from its shadow, not untouched, but transformed, carrying forward the legacy of a breath both generous and grave. Let us not forget this chapter, hidden beneath coal and memory, but let it guide our hands, hearts, and lungs as we shape the coming dawn. For the most enduring stories are not those shouted into history, but those whispered into breath, passed quietly from epoch to epoch, asking not to be retold but to be remembered. The earth breathes still, and if we are to remain part of its song, we must learn, finally, to breathe with it, and not against it. Sleep now, held in balance. The story has been told. The breath is ours. And in the final hush, as the veil between memory and motion thins, let us carry forward the breath not as relic, but as ritual. The Carboniferous was not simply Earth's deep inhale of possibility. It was the first knowing pause, the held breath before the song of balance could begin. What it left us is not just coal or canopy, not just fire-fed flora or the shadows of insects that once ruled the air, but a rhythm, a pulse beneath the soil, within the wind, inside ourselves. To remember it is to rejoin it, to breathe with thought, with intention, with reverence. The story lingers in the hush of forests before storm, in the silent exhale of creatures who live close to the ground's heartbeat. This was never only history, it was instruction. So as dawn rises and the earth stirs once more, let us not only wake, but listen, for the Carboniferous has told its tale. And now, with breath tempered by memory, it is our turn to decide the kind of world the next great inhale will build. Here, at the threshold of silence and responsibility, the Carboniferous bequeaths its final lesson not in spectacle, but in subtlety. The world it shaped was not just a marvel of biology, but a meditation on limits, the kind of limit not imposed, but discovered through flame and bloom, through excess and restraint. Its story, carried not on winds but within them, asks a question that echoes across the spaces we now inhabit. What does it truly mean to breathe wisely? We leave this epoch not with fear, but with reverence sharpened by understanding. That oxygen, like every gift from the earth, must be held with care. That history is not a tether to the past, but a lantern for the future. So let the breath of the Carboniferous settle softly within us, steady, sacred, and remembered. For in that quiet rhythm, more ancient than language, and more vital than flame, lives the truth we must carry, that the atmosphere is not ours to command, but to cherish. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let us now breathe with humility. And so we end, tucked beneath the leaf-shadowed memories of a world that once breathed too deeply and paid dearly for it. The Carboniferous was not a caution written in haste, but a parable carved patiently over eons, its wisdom embedded in stone, in cell, in story. It handed us not judgment, but invitation to walk lighter, to breathe truer, to wonder more often at the fragility of our inheritance. Let this moment be the taper's last glow before quiet, the final breath of history folding into reverence. For in a world that once nearly burned on the air it adored, the lesson remains crystalline. No element is harmless when unchecked, and no future safe without remembrance. Sleep now, shielded by that truth, and when you rise, let every exhale carry the echo of an epoch that dared to dream in oxygen and survived long enough to teach us how. The Carboniferous has exhaled. May we be worthy of its silence, And in this final breath, as twilight slips gently into the corners of ancient memory, we hold a truth wrought not by fire alone, but by witnessing. The Carboniferous did not roar for attention, it whispered when the world leaned too far into its own abundance. Its echoes do not ask for grand monuments or fervent prayers, but for steady hands and listening minds. In every wind-shaped silhouette and coal-darkened breeze, it repeats the same quiet refrain. Remember the air, not as a given, but as a gift, not as fuel for industry, but as the first instrument of life's fragile song. So now, as the last fern frond curls back into sleep, and the story dissolves into dawn's cool hush, let all that we've heard of flame and bloom, of balance and excess settle not in storybooks, but within the rhythm of how we choose to live. For the earth does not forget, and the breath that nearly remade life still lingers patient, potent, and poised to shape what we become. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let this be our first true breath in return. As the final chord fades into silence, what remains is not just an echo of a world long gone, but the imprint of possibility carried in the simplest act of breath. The Carboniferous did not leave behind ruins, it left behind rhythms woven through atmosphere and instinct, memorandum and molecule. In its swoop from breathless marvel to narrow survival, it offered not just warning but wisdom, that life, when given too much, must choose restraint or risk erasure. And now, as the dawn of our own challenges breaks across the sky, let us not ask only what nature can endure, but whether we have learned enough to endure beside it. The Carboniferous has breathed its tale into stone, into fire, into us. To hold that memory is to honor the thin thread on which all life hangs. So breathe in now slowly, gently as the story closes, and choose to remember. For reverence is the breath that carries history safely forward. So let this final whisper drift not into forgetting, but into foresight, a breath passed down like a flare in the dark, to remind us where abundance leads when left unguarded. The Carboniferous was not merely a lapse in balance, it was a meditation on what life does with too much promise and too little caution. Its legacy remains etched, not only in stone, but in data, design, and the haunted hush before a forest fire erupts. In this last quiet, we are not asked to marvel, but to measure, to take air not as infinite, but as invitation, to awaken not just informed, but aligned. For if history is breath, and breath is balance, then the story is far from over. The Carboniferous has exhaled. We, who now shape the air's next act, must choose whether we breathe forward with wisdom or return, unaware, to the tinder of our beginnings. And as this vast, fire-touched chronicle takes its final breath, what remains is not a spectacle, but a solemn offering, an inheritance threaded through time, grounded in the weight of balance. The Carboniferous, with its towering trees and dragon-flown skies, its combustible plenitude and whispered endurance, was not just an ancient epoch, it was Earth's first great dialogue between life and air. Now, with history soft around the edges and dawn pressing gently on the world's horizon, we step forward into a quieter atmosphere, aware, awakened, and deeply indebted. Let this last breath find us humbled, not haunted, inspired not just by magnitude, but by meaning. That life, stretched to its limit, chose not collapse, but adaptation. That air, malleable yet mighty, can cradle worlds or fracture them. So sleep now in the hush between eras. The Carboniferous has ended, but its breath, its rhythm, lives on within us. May we carry it with care. And this is where we release the breath held through fire, forest, storm, and silence, back into the arms of the earth that first taught us its weight. The Carboniferous did not emerge to teach us conquest, but reverence. It gave us scale, yes, but more importantly, it gave us rhythm, the ancient, aching cadence of a world attempting to balance its own brilliance. Let this final image remain, hovering like mist above an ancient swamp, a world thick with life, veering toward ignition, and then learning not to abandon its breath, but to adjust it. This is not just where the story ends. It is where we inherit its tempo. From fern to ember, from ash to awareness, we carry forward a lesson folded in the quiet of leaves and the fury of fire. The Carboniferous has exhaled, not in warning alone, but in faith that something on the other side of excess can remember what it means to breathe with care. Let us be that breath. Let us be that memory. Now, sleep, and let the earth, once more, breathe in peace. Let this final exhale be a benediction not of closure, but of continuity. The Carboniferous did not surrender its fire-wrapped legacy to oblivion, but handed it forward in silence, through coal seams warmed by memory and breath lines coded in vigilance. We are not its aftermath, we are its echo, made of carbon and consequence, breathing futures shaped by lessons left smoldering in the past. So as this story fades into the hush beyond language, do not think of it as an ending, but as a long breath shared across time, asking gently, can we hold this balance better than before? Sleep now with that question curled in the air around you, a soft ember of responsibility and awe. For the earth remembers. Now, it waits for us to remember too. So let us carry the Carboniferous not as a weight, but as a whispered rhythm in our breath, an inheritance not of fire alone, but of foresight. For in that epoch where air dared to offer too much, life answered not with permanence, but with transformation. And if we've heard its full breath tonight, traced its story from clouded skies to fossil seams, then may we wake tomorrow gifted not just with knowledge, but with humility. The earth has endured its oxygen-rich crucible, and it has remembered. So must we. That balance is not simply a fact, it is a practice, a vow renewed in every choice between burn and bloom, silence and storm, greed and grace. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let this be our inhale drawn with care, held with reverence, and released into a future worthy of breath itself. And when the hush of this tale settles at last, stitched into the auroras of sleep and the marrow of thought, let its essence remain a breath remembered. The Carboniferous does not end behind us, fossilized in silence, but within us, pulsing like ancient chlorophyll, in every resolve to tread lightly, to breathe mindfully, to wonder deeply. It asked nothing more profound than this, to listen. It burned and bloomed and buried wisdom in carbon, not as punishment, but as practice. So carry that practice onward, not out of fear, but out of love for air, for balance, for the quiet miracle of life that grew bold and learned restraint. The story is told, the breath is drawn. And in this final pause, may we return to sleep not only calmed but called. Called to be keepers of breath, guardians of grace. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let our next breath honor the flame that whispered the world into awe. And thus, the final whisper from a world lit by breath and balanced by fire dissolves into the still rhythm of night. The Carboniferous gave no easy truths, no clean endings, only echoes. Yet in those echoes lies everything. The calculus of courage in restraint, the architecture of life etched in cycles and soot. As we fall into sleep, cradled by the memory of canopies tall as mountains and air thick with promise and peril, remember this balance is not static, it is alive. It breathes with us, and it waits to see whether, in this new age of sparks and screens, we will hold that memory not only in lungs, but in choices. So let this last breath linger in the hollow hush between heartbeat and wind, reminding us that to truly honor the past is not to worship its wonders, but to heed its warnings. The Carboniferous has exhaled. Let us sleep now, thoughtful and quiet, with just enough breath left to begin again with care. And with this last exhale, the Carboniferous does not vanish, it integrates quietly, wholly, into the atmosphere of our awareness. No longer just an epoch dusted in textbooks or coiled beneath mining towns, it becomes the ever-present breathline stretching behind and ahead, reminding us that what we breathe carries consequence, that air itself holds memory. And so, as sleep takes hold and the screen fades completely to black, let this final silence be not just the end of a story, but the beginning of stewardship, of listening, of reverence. The forest burns no longer, but its lesson smolders still. We are the lungs now, the keepers of equilibrium, the ones who must decide if the next breath builds harmony or feeds fire once more. So breathe slowly, deeply, with care. The Carboniferous has exhaled. The rest is up to us. So here, at the close of flame-fed memory and oxygen-hewn ore, the Carboniferous leaves us with no grand applause, only the kind of quiet that tingles against the skin, a quiet earned through fire, softened through survival. Its breath, once sprawling and unchecked, now resides in the intimate spaces between tree and sky, instinct and adaptation, science and soul. That ancient surge, so volatile and vital, shaped the terms on which we breathe today. And though the world's air may thin or thicken with time, the lesson holds, that to breathe well is to remember wisely. The Carboniferous is not a forgotten forge. It is the blueprint smoldering beneath our choices, calling for reverence with each inhale. So, let us carry its final breath onward, not as burden but as blessing, not as history but as hope. The Carboniferous has exhaled, and so must we, choosing not just to live, but to deserve the air that keeps us alive. Let this be the last ember nestled in the breath of history, a small, steadfast glow that outlives firestorms and forests. The Carboniferous gave us the contours of possibility, that life can brave abundance, and that air, though invisible, carries weight heavier than stone. As we slip into silence now, may we not drift away from this memory, but draw it close into policy, into practice, into the hush between heartbeat and atmosphere. For the air that once birthed giants and beckoned flame still flows through us, asking not for dominion but for care. This is where the story ends, not in spectacle, but in stewardship. The Carboniferous has breathed its final note. The breath is ours now to honor, to hold, and to humbly remember. Sleep now, cradled in that rhythm. The earth breathes on and waits. So let this final breath linger like mist over fern-covered memory, a hush not lost in time, but carefully passed along the currents of consciousness. The Carboniferous is finished. Yes, but its exhale lives on, threaded through leaf and lung, through ember and echo, through the very questions we carry toward every rising Sunday. It gave us more than myth, it offered meaning, textured in oxygen and trial, in survival learned through fire and patience. Now, as we draw the curtain closed and sleep folds around this ancient rhythm, let its message settle, that even the softest element can shape history, and the gentlest breath can change the course of everything. The Carboniferous has spoken in silence, burned in bloom, and vanished into vigilance. We are its breath now. Let us carry it forward, not as a weight, but as wisdom, reverent, resilient, and ready. And now, with this final, measured breath, we mark the quiet threshold between remembrance and responsibility. The Carboniferous has laid its story before us, not as flame or fossil alone, but as the architecture of balance etched deep into air and root, silence and spark. Its breath, once too generous, lingers still in our atmosphere, gently asking, will we now breathe in wisdom, or forget again the cost of abundance unbound? Let this be the coda not of sleep alone, but of resolve, a promise folded in the hush of ferns and the flicker of firelight long gone. May the next breath we take carry not just oxygen, but intention. The Carboniferous has exhaled, And in waking, so must we with care, with clarity, and with reverence for every breath that dares to shape a world worth keeping. So now, as breath meets hush, and memory meets dawn, let us close this tale not with sorrow, but with stewardship. The Carboniferous gave us the oldest map of all, a chart, not of lands, but of limits. It whispered truths in oxygen and silence alike, truths we carry now in our blood and in our choices. Let this final moment be our inhale before action, our pause before purpose. For the air that once built empires of fern and shadow still surrounds us, waiting to see if we have learned enough to breathe with balance, to walk with wonder, and to remember that the most powerful forces are often the ones we never see, only feel. The Carboniferous has exhaled. The breath is ours. Let us make it count. So let that breath settle now, deep and sacred, not as dust in the dark, but as light carried forward. The Carboniferous did not simply come and go, it left behind a compass, forged in fire and fern, to steer us through the air we now shape with each decision. In the stillness that follows this final whisper, may we find not only sleep, but certainty that breath is not infinite, and memory is not optional. This tale was not crafted to comfort, but to awaken. So as silence cradles us into night, know this: the air you draw next is written by the past and speaks to the future. Let it be drawn in gratitude. Let it be released in care. The Carboniferous has finished its song. The breath is now yours to honor, to guard, to give wisely, before the world forgets again. And as the story fades fully into the hush of dawn, let its last breath remain with us, not as a warning etched in fear, but as a memory stirred by wisdom. The Carboniferous, lush and volatile, reminded us that air has agency and abundance demands reverence. It showed that life, when nourished without boundaries, can soar and consume in the very same breath. So now, as silence settles where fire once thundered and ferns reach skyward, may we carry forward not just the knowledge of what came before, but the understanding that the future is drawn in breath and balanced by memory. The Carboniferous has exhaled. That breath is now part of us, shaping not just our lungs, but our choices. In the quiet that follows, let us breathe not with certainty, but with care. For the story is not gone, it is waiting, in the air. And thus, beneath the deep green hush of memory and the shadowed sigh of fire long past, the Carboniferous leaves us with the most human of reminders that to live well is to live in rhythm. What began as a tale of air too rich to endure now closes as a promise whispered into modern lungs. That balance is not found, but kept, day by day, breath by breath. We do not inherit the earth as it was, but as it warns. And in that warning, steeped in oxygen and silence alike, lies the path forward. So let this final breath not vanish, but remain rooted in reverence, drifting softly between fern dreams and forest futures. The Carboniferous has exhaled. We have listened. Now may each breath we take be worthy of what came before, and gentle enough to shape what comes next. So let this final breath not fade, but settle into thought, into soil, into the quiet rhythm that binds past and future to the present we now shape. The Carboniferous has told its story in fire and fern, in the stillness of coal seams and the rustle of leaves grown from former flame. In its exhale, we have heard not just the arc of oxygen and evolution, but the soft urgency of stewardship calling us forward. This is where history meets promise, not in spectacle, but in the careful way we choose to breathe from here. May our future rise gently on that breath, guided not by the abundance of ambition, but by the pulse of remembrance. Let the Carboniferous rest now, its oxygen-rich legacy folded into the atmosphere of our conscience. It has exhaled, it has taught, and if we are listening, truly listening, We will breathe not only because we must, but because we remember what it once cost to forget.